Welcome to the EI Guru podcast, a podcast completely focused on emotional intelligence. Typically, the first question I get is, what is emotional intelligence? In very simple terms, it's how we manage our emotions in our interactions with ourselves and others. Or put another way, it's being in the right state and not being in a state when under pressure. Emotional intelligence is another label for mindset, and we all know that when navigating those important conversations, we need to tap into our best. I'll be interviewing leaders and experts in this ever-expanding field and sharing the data on why emotional intelligence is the difference that makes the difference in all of our relationships. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. So good morning and welcome back to the latest episode of the EI Guru podcast. This is episode 8. And just to confuse you all, this is episode 4 with Jo and I talking about the EI overview and the model that Jo came up with. It's probably almost 30 years ago. I'm not sure exactly of the date. And it's great because we've had a little bit of a break. Jo's been on holiday. I've been doing some stuff. I'm sneaking off on holiday at the end of this week. So, Jo, let's just try and recap what we've covered so far and maybe just remind listeners to the EI framework, I suppose, the 6 quadrants. And then cover off what we've covered in episode 1, 2, and 3 together. And then where we're heading today. So today we're going to be looking at the flexibility scale, connecting with others, and authenticity, which is a really interesting aspect of self-management. So they're all in the self-management scales. And then we're going to have a look at the business case for emotional intelligence. So I know you're going to refer to your white paper that you worked on sometime and published. And I'm really keen to sort of get that out to create the awareness for leaders and people that aren't leaders that want to improve their emotional intelligence for the benefits of improving their emotional intelligence, because ultimately the data is overwhelming that if you improve your emotional intelligence, you will get better results. So the information is there. You will get a return on investment. So organizations should be absolutely focused on this as the thing that makes the difference if you're looking to improve your performance. And especially interestingly, when you're under pressure, when organizations are under pressure and they're cutting the budget for this and stopping travel and all these other things, and they're looking to increase their bottom line, this is where it's really interesting. They tend to not develop their leaders and their team members. And actually, this is the time when they should be doing that, because this is the bit that will make a difference while they're trying to perform under pressure. So anyway, it's a fairly long introduction, Jo, but if you can maybe sneakily cover off the 6 quadrants and then cover off what we've covered, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. And I was just thinking about what you're saying, Jim, about, companies pull back a bit when there's commercial financial pressures. And in fact, that's a time you need to invest, of course, because society's changed a lot in the last 10 years, and it's always changing. But that's what influences organizations to change, which influences the need for different leadership. So if you're not moving forward, you're going to get left behind, certainly in terms of leadership.
Yeah.
And just another thought as you're talking is, I think emotional intelligence is, as you say, it's been through about at least 30 years now of research. And I think of it as forming, storming, norming, three stages. When, back in the 90s, noughties, everyone perhaps overrated a little bit the emotional intelligence potential. And then in the next decade, there was a lot of academic criticism of it. But it's really the third decade that I think we've got our more substantial meta-analytic research, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. So I think it's really grown in maturity, and now we're in a far better state to know what advantages and benefits we can draw from, which are realistic, and the added value of emotional intelligence compared to other approaches. So I'll talk a bit about that later. as you say, we're working through the different facets of emotional intelligence based on the emotional intelligence profile framework. It's an organizing model. And at the beginning, it's the fourth, discussion we've had. And in the beginning, we talked about what do we mean by emotional intelligence, intelligent use of your emotions, being aware of your thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and your relationships, and so forth. But how do you organize that information? That's where the framework comes in very neatly, as you know very well, Jim, and many of our listeners are very familiar with the instrument.
Yeah.
But even if you're not using the tool, I think the models are almost just as good. If you've got a good understanding of the theory and the background, then when you're coaching or working with an individual, then you can apply that.
Yeah.
Whether or not you've got the questionnaire and the data behind you, that's just a sort of added bonus.
Yeah, I think you're bang on, actually, because when I've worked with leaders, and if you've unpacked and explored someone's results of their emotional intelligence questionnaire, it's really interesting because, of course, once they've got a deepened insight into how it's shaped and their own scores and how they've landed, it's much easier for them to start thinking, oh yeah, I think Joe must be, such and such on self-regard, and he must have a higher regard for others, sort of thing. So you can start calibrating where you think they might land.
And I remember Will Schutz, who's the father of a lot of this stuff, FIRO theory, and he would say the numbers are just there to provoke people, largely to get the conversation going. It's the conversation that really matters.
Yeah.
So at the early stages, they're very, very valuable. At the later stages, the scores become less important to people, and they kind of know where they are. They know how they're developing, and the chances are they know that they've performed at all levels of that scale. It isn't a fixed position.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence is changeable, developable, which is a great thing. So we do know when we're in the grip of strong emotions, we're not managing them, then it's going to take us to a different position than when we're feeling at our best. But learning to manage that is the point of all of this. Learning to notice it, recognize it, and manage it. And that's what the framework does, because it breaks it down into the two areas, which is about myself, what's going on for me, managing that effectively, and of course how that impacts on other people, and being aware of that and understanding how other people impact on me, the relationship side. And as you'll know, there's arrows going between them. They actually go from left to right. So how I behave is going to impact other people, but equally there is a reciprocal influence, of course. And we also break the framework into different levels or tiers. We describe the onion model, and you peel off the outside layer. What you see isn't always what you're getting. People, particularly when people are feeling anxious or defensive, it tends to bring out some more rigid behaviors, inflexibilities that actually are very unhelpful in the long run. They might help us feel better immediately, like blaming other people or avoiding problems, but they don't deal with the long-term solution.
Yeah.
Which is why sometimes we have to go beneath behavior to understand where that's coming from. And often it's embodied in our feelings, which we if we don't notice our feelings or other people's, then we're missing at least, well, I would say at least 50% of what's really going on for us. Thoughts, feelings, and then the behaviors that come from that. And one way into that is through self-awareness, noticing, slowing down, and awareness of others. And that gives us a clue. It gives us an indication of why do I feel upset when this happens, when somebody ignores me, when I'm not the center of attention? Or why do I find it very anxious when I am the center of attention? Or when people don't think I'm very competent, or they don't seem to care about me, or they care about me too much? All these things are going on, but this is where we get to the real core of the onion, and we understand these are underlying patterns, what I refer to as attitudes about our self-concept. And these are really what drives us, and these are accumulated throughout our life. You don't need to get too heavy and psychological, but it is useful to understand sometimes some of the things that are triggering me.
Completely. Really, of course, I love the model, and I've been using it for 20 odd years. So I'm sort of very biased when we have this conversation, and it's just fascinating how it always tends to link back to, and as you said, you don't need to get too psychological about it in terms of blaming mum and dad, but actually so much of it is, I think the understanding of how it's been shaped really helps you then start paying attention to it and saying, okay, it's because of, this when I was maybe younger. But actually that it alludes itself to, okay, so there's choice about how I might navigate this in the future. Now I've got the awareness, I can now do something with it. But without the awareness, you continue to run that same pattern. You're stuck in it, you're stuck in that groove, like a record player, the old vinyls, you're stuck in that groove of just going over and over and over the same pattern all the time.
And instead of wearing down those grooves as a record, it embeds them.
Yeah.
It makes them more automated, reflex response. We become even less aware of it, and we become actual experts at it. That's the great thing, and the bad thing is we become so good at it, we don't even know we're doing it. And we manage somehow to create a world where we just about cope but we have to keep on doing this, play out these rigid defensive patterns that actually create a lot of difficulties for other people and actually to ourselves, because sooner or later it'll catch up with us. So this is what we talk about when we're referring to self-regard. How do I feel towards myself, and when does that come out? And our regard for other people. And as you remember, we put those two facets together to form the attitude matrix, or what comes from the life positions, and those influence much of our behavior. What Carl Rogers called about unconditional positive regard, unconditional. And the point there is that it's not dependent on I must do this, I must do that. It's self-acceptance, self-compassion is often the antidote to a lot of these difficulties, rigidities in our behavior that come out. So we're just looking at different levels, and the reason we break it into the different framework, you could just start with self-regard, say it's all down to that, but that's a bit hard work to unpack, and that's what the questionnaire and the model does. It breaks into 16 different elements, which is what we've been working through, starting with the core self-concept awareness scales, and we give various tools and techniques to help with that, such as the emotions wheel. You might remember we talked about positive and negative affect.
No, the emotions wheel is such a powerful thing to get people to check in with. I know you've run team leadership exercises, and it's a great thing to just create the awareness of, okay, so where are you as we start today? The weekend's gone past. Where are you on this? You've got a big week ahead of you. What sort of emotions are bubbling up to the surface for you? And I think it's a fantastic way of calibrating and just creating some awareness around the different and how you sort of can go around on various parts of the day on that scale.
I think the challenge people often face with emotional intelligence is we've been so ingrained with personality tools, which are a lot of thinking about our behavior, but not being in the present moment. The great thing about this emotions wheel and focusing on feelings is it's very present. It's what's been going on for you right now? Where are you at? How's that affecting you? And that's what we've explored through the self-awareness, and then we've gone into the self-management scales. And you'll remember that there are 6 of these that are ordered in terms of their relation to self-regard. So emotional resilience is the most prominent, followed by personal power, self-determination, if you like, self-choice. And then goal directedness, knowing what you want, making it happen. And we've got that far. Now we're going to move into the others on that area, and particularly those self-management scales, I think, are very relevant to self-leadership, if you like, managing yourself and your own behavior to be effective. And often you find if you do that effectively, other people tend to feel more confident and you tend to follow you. Now, obviously, there's a big other side, which we haven't yet discussed about leadership, which is relationships. But don't ignore the important part is starting from yourself.
Completely.
Getting that right.
It's almost it sort of beautifully dovetails into Gandhi's quote, be the change you want to see in the world. So you have to do it first before you can then do it effectively with other people. So you need to be the example. I mean, there was I think it's Brené Brown talks about being an example of what good looks like. So so be that example yourself first, and then go and test that with when you're working with other people and
Yeah,
interacting with others.
which
So
is
yeah,
what these scales are very much about. And they do obviously impact. One thing we haven't really got into too much is the relationship between the different elements of the organizing framework helps to do that to some extent. But things like having personal power and, let's say, trust in other people, what will be the connection there? Does my sense
yeah,
of inner locus of control and sense of purpose help me to build trust in others, or can it move it away from that? And
yep.
those sort of blends, if they're managed effectively, can be very, very effective. And that's a sort of, I was talking to you earlier, Jim, about this being a sort of masterclass level of interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we will, once we've gone through the 16 scales and shared that with our listeners, it would be great. We will definitely come back and do some masterclass stuff for people that want to go deeper still into this whole piece of managing yourself and working well with others. So yeah, you're right. I mean, that was a thought that was bubbling up in my head was as you were talking about it, I find the self-management scales so fascinating,
Mm,
especially the influence that typically if someone's got a low self-regard, it's not unusual for them to then not have a particularly high emotional resilience, for example. And also they may also lack a high personal power. And it's really, I find it so fascinating that can then, so they can have a low emotional resilience and a low personal power, but their superpower is goal directedness,
yeah.
so which helps them operate effectively. Or if they haven't got a high goal directedness, the scale that they then might sort of significantly lean on is their flexibility, which we'll get into now, Joe, and talk about the flexibility scale, because that can have an impact as well. So I find the whole thing, the
Mm.
interplay between the different scales, is just really interesting. So
One of the things we did talk about before, Jim, was people focus immediately on their lowest scale scores, because we tend to focus on what's not working. And actually, as a good coach, we want to help them to recognize the thing that is relative strength for them, because that's going to be the resource to help them to deal with the thing that they find more difficult. Use that strength, such as goal directedness, to work on your low emotional resilience. And the ways of doing that, of course.
yeah, no, completely. So help the listeners understand the flexibility scale. So that's the next one that we'll be
Mm,
looking at on the self-management scale. So this is your ability to flex when under pressure and adapt and change,
mm, mm.
if I'm right in terms of the label.
Yeah, we call it a sort of capacity to adapt your
Yeah,
thoughts and behaviors to changing circumstances. So I say capacity because it doesn't mean, and this seems to be a fad nowadays, that people should always be changing and change is always good. And we're not saying that. We're saying the capacity to adapt yourself appropriately is. I certainly know some colleagues in the past who have been, I'm not that change oriented, other people aren't. There's nothing right or wrong. Some people aren't, some people aren't. But
yeah,
can you change when it's necessary? Or other people who are just compulsively driven not to do the same thing again.
yeah,
They get bored very easily, for example. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't having good flexibility, but this is a great example, Jim, of combining scales where
yeah.
maybe what you're lacking is the goal directedness, seeing things through. So this capacity to change is very important. And it's also,
And when
yeah,
when we're talking about flexibility, I'm just
mm,
chuckling internally. So I've got to share it. Flexibility is not you going to a yoga or a Pilates class. It's
yeah,
about your
yeah,
mental capacity
yeah,
to flex and pivot.
yeah,
Your view and the way you're approaching things. So I always
yeah.
find it funny when we talk about flexibility. I always sort of end up stretching my leg and saying it's not about being physically flexible. Although
No,
that, I suppose, that could come into it in some
it's
situations.
a good point because sometimes, I've sort of lived and breathed these constructs for a very long time. You stop questioning them. You just assume everyone sees them the way you do. And actually,
Yes.
of course, they're probably giggling all the way along while I'm talking about this stuff. Um, Thanks for bringing that up. But
No,
yeah,
it's just a
yeah,
nuance of mine. You know what I'm like. I'm a
no, it's a good.
child. I'm childlike
Yeah,
around some of this stuff, Joe. So, but it's about your ability to
yeah,
flex and pivot
yeah. And adapt.
and adapt. Yeah.
And
And
you know, I don't know if you've seen the resilience model of change that relates to the framework, but we've talked about 4 stages, and the second stage is very much, you know, you respond to change with adversity, with low self-regard, low regard for, you know, I think feeling dreadful. The next stage is very much around adaptation to your
yeah,
circumstances, which is this one. And it's learning to accept, to recognize what's going on, not necessarily sort it all out. That might be personal power, but it's not moving on too quickly. It's sometimes just sitting with yourself and learning to be okay with it and getting yourself prepared, recovering a little bit, and then getting ready for the next stage. So flexibility comes in a lot when it's about dealing with setbacks and adversity. And in fact, a lot of adversity is created by a lack of flexibility. So often what we do is we overplay our strengths. So I always start, you know, becoming very authoritarian or something, and actually what I need to do is back off.
yeah.
Or it may be that you're a person who just backs off all the time, and really you need to be a bit more assertive in those circumstances. So moving outside of your comfort zone is a big aspect of flexibility.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But the
And
challenge, of course, of moving outside your comfort zone, is it feels uncomfortable.
of
Okay, and
course,
then you're talking about self-regard. Oh,
yeah,
I'm going to make a fool of myself. I'm going to be humiliated. People aren't going to like me. All these unconscious, you know, we talked about the core of the onion. This kind of stuff starts preventing us doing the flexibility stuff.
yeah.
And we start making excuses. Oh, I just don't do those things. I'm an introvert, or I'm an extrovert, or I'm this, I'm that, or people won't like me. So we protect ourselves from even having to go there.
Yeah.
And that change in coaching development is a big aspect of this facet.
I'm laughing again internally because I'm thinking about myself and applying, you know, when I scored myself, you know, my goal directedness is off the scale. So
Mm,
I'm extremely focused, but
mm,
it meant that actually my flexibility suffered. So and I love the interplay between goal directedness and flexibility.
mm,
And
mm,
I get it personally. So at a
mm,
personal level, I understand it. And so I lean on my goal directedness to help me navigate through stuff.
mm,
And
mm.
that then masks me growing my
Yeah,
flexibility
yeah,
scale. And
yeah, yeah,
actually, I almost think I don't need to be flexible, because if I get goal directed,
yeah,
I'll achieve the goal.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
just sort of smash through all those things
yeah.
to achieve
And
the goal.
I mean, do phrases like cutting your losses, or having a break, or letting it go, do those seem anathemas to you? Are they sort of
Well,
heavens forbid?
again, it just cracks me up because I think about the life of Brian and the soldier that he had to fight with, and
uh,
he's chopped his arm off and he's chopped the other arm off, and then the legs. He
a
says, "Come
flesh
on,
wound.
yeah, exactly. It's just it's let's carry
I
on.
mean,
Where are you going?
yeah.
Yeah, come back and fight. You know, it's sort of like
And
yes,
it gets you a long way, doesn't it? And it probably gets you through your childhood and other things. But you know, as we really want to get to that higher level of, you know, growing with ourselves, as you know,
yeah.
you can't get away from flexibility, really. I mean, I'm sure you've got a lot more than you give yourself credit for. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Oh no, I mean I've grown. It's just an awareness of when I first saw the scales. I thought, oh, hello. You know, I can relate to the goal directedness stuff, which I know is very much me. And then I realized that actually my flexibility scale was low
Mm,
because
mm,
I rely so heavily on my goal directedness. You know, so my emotional resilience, personal power, and goal directedness, they're sort of like my superpowers. And then that meant that I wasn't paying any attention to
mm.
the flexibility
Yeah.
scale at all.
This is why it's so important, I think. And I talk later about leadership, and you know, personal power, goal directors are very strong correlates with leadership effectiveness.
Yeah.
But if you don't blend it at all with flexibility, they're the leaders that they'll follow, but there'll be a lot of resentment, and sooner or later it'll end in some kind of catastrophe if that person is unwilling to bend, just because that's a strategy that's always worked for them.
Yeah, and that's I think that's what it is. It's sort of like, well, the evidence is just blindingly obvious.
Mm, mm.
You need to pivot, you need to change.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's I suppose if organizationally, you know, when I think about it as take the flexibility scale into an organization, and I think
Mm,
about a book that was written by, I think it might have been John Cotter, How the Mighty Fall. And it were the core message of that book was hubris, that they so they weren't they just thought they were too big and they couldn't fall. They couldn't.
It's classic, isn't it? Particularly success is what breeds inflexibility. The sense of this is working, I must continue this.
Yeah.
And it may continue to work. And you find a lot of organizations, it's not just an individual, it's the leadership board of directors who lack flexibility, and they've kind of self-convinced themselves in their bubble of self-belief. But of course, reality is always going to be more powerful than self-belief, or even that. And self-delusion, of course. So you're not going to get that without self-awareness. So flexibility will improve with self-awareness at the same time, recognizing who else do I need around me? Where are my weaknesses? Where do I make good judgments and less good judgments? And recognizing it's about combining our strengths. I think we were having a chat before, Jim, about our different personalities, and blend us together. We might be a pretty good human being.
Yeah, you put
on
us
our
in,
own. We've
put us
got
in
our
one of
faults.
those. Put us in a blending machine, and we'd definitely come out as a better version of, Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever. Yeah.
But I like type theory. I know a lot of people don't, but Jungian type, you got your preferences, but the big misunderstanding of type is that you are that color or you are that personality letter, and it's really that massive misunderstanding that we are both sides and we're different combinations. It's learning to use both equally effectively, and the combination of those is really what it's all about. And the same with all personality tools. I think they tend to take us down that route of saying I am this, and trait models. And the great thing about AI is it's very much developable. And the biggest challenge you face, I think, initially as a coach is the self view that I am who I am, and it's not going to change.
And also something that I listened to recently from Gabor Mate's one of his podcasts was this, and it was a really interesting thing that I sort of gripped on, was our relationship with the attachment to our identity. So as soon as I say, oh, I'm a coach, that's what I identify with, I'm then making myself less, I'm sort of now taking more of, I'm not as a whole human being. I identify very specifically with the fact that I'm a coach, or I'm an Ironman, or I've done the race across America, all those things. And then actually, instead of saying that, I'm more than that. I sort of reduce my lens of, if I identify with the fact that I'm a coach, if that's what I say I am, then I'm diminishing myself as a human being in terms of all the other things that I actually am as well.
It's like a constant tension. And I'm not sure, it's almost philosophical, this. I'm not sure what is
of course.
right here between what we talk about later, authenticity, knowing who you are and your identity, which is something that's very much encouraged, and then not being bound by your identity at the same time.
Those labels. The
labels.
Labels. I mean, I think that's probably a better word actually than identity, to be fair. But it was just that I remembered, it just jumped into my head about that. It made me think, stop for a second, because I thought, oh, hello, that's an interesting thought.
And so when we look at authenticity, it's worth combining that with flexibility and say, okay, some people are very flexible but don't have because they don't have a sense of inner guidance, inner radar as to where they're going or what they want, who they want to be. I remember when I was doing a lot of assessments for graduate assessments, and they're kind of in some ways easiest and sometimes the most difficult, because they're very open. I'll do anything, I just want a job. I don't really know what I want, so I'll try this, try that. That's great. Very open-minded. Versus senior people who say, this is my work experience, this is what I'm good at, and I don't really want a job that doesn't fit. So you kind of say it's a mutual decision as to what job you do. It's them deciding what they want, not you as an assessor. And that's what you do at more senior levels. And they've got different benefits to both. But I think as we grow up, we do kind of want a sense of who we are, knowing what we want. But the danger is it gets too strong and it leads to inflect, which is why this one is a useful one to pick up with senior coaching very often.
And then just talk to me a little bit about the other way around. So someone that's got a really high level of flexibility,
Mm,
but actually they haven't got a very high level of goal directedness,
mm,
and
mm,
how that might just play out.
mm.
Just what's your
Well, it
take
can be
on?
quite fun. It can be quite spontaneous, and almost childlike. And they, it's a gift as well. And as I've said, I think previously when we talked about goal directors, don't reduce your flexibility, because that's a capacity. It doesn't mean you have to use it all the time, but just keep it in the bag, use it when you need it, but recognize maybe it isn't the time.
Yeah,
Maybe what I
okay.
really need to do is focus more on another scale that's going to help me get what, like personal power, like goal directness, like authenticity, things that are going to help me achieve the thing I want to achieve. Because you have to say, okay, what is it? Where do I want to go? What do I have to do to get that? And why haven't I got that already? And it might be overplaying flexibility and not using. You could argue somebody who's flexible could be flexible enough to change, so they could be less flexible because they're flexible. See what I mean? They could, because they've got that capacity to change. Because hang on a minute, what I need to do is be a bit more organized, structured, and decisive. That means I'm going to have to be more flexible in my behavior. So
Yeah,
ironically, this is a gift. Having it means you have that capacity to do that change.
yeah. Yeah, and I like the rigid, when someone's got a low flexibility scale,
Mm.
and that it's very easy to understand that when they're inflexible, they just won't budge.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's very easy to understand that.
And I think we all have, even if you are a flexible person, I think we will all have that inflexible part, which comes out when our when we're feeling upset, angry, misunderstood, and
Yes.
it brings out that childhood defensive behavior, which is the characteristic. That is almost a definition of defensive. I'm going to protect myself, and I'm going to, regardless of what's happening out there. So it's that uncompromising, difficult behavior we all have. So we
Yeah.
all know when that's the scale bombs.
Yeah, I can definitely recognize that stubbornness in me for sure, 100%. I
Mm,
can, and especially when you say it's the defensive behavior, it's just like,
mm,
okay, yeah, you've now,
mm,
I'm not budging on this. It's
mm,
sort of
mm,
like
mm, mm. And these
really
are
interesting.
deep-rooted patterns very often that stop us feeling awful about ourselves, but
Yeah,
they don't deal with the issue very well in the long run. So yeah, recognize it. Don't beat yourself up, because that makes it worse. Just
yeah,
say,
of
I
course.
notice this is happening. Let's take a deep breath. And this is where we get into techniques for developing our flexibility. Um, one is very much a habit change approach. And I always think it's really important at the end of a coaching session if somebody goes away with a thing they're going to do.
Yep.
Because at the very beginning, I said emotional intelligence isn't about knowing about EI. We both know a lot about EI, but I'm certainly not the most emotionally intelligent person. Yeah.
Yeah,
EI is through experiential activity. And that's how we develop it, is after the coaching session, we go away and apply it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that means if you want people to change, we need to go away and apply something specific. And what's more important than the actual thing you're doing is the fact that you're making the effort to change a habit or characteristic or
yeah. No, I
way
like
of
that.
being.
I like that. Take it for a run around the block is what I
Yeah.
tend to say
Okay.
with people. Yeah, sort of like
Yeah.
go and give it a whirl.
Mm, mm.
See, test the theory.
Test it
Test it,
out. Yeah.
see,
Mm,
have a go, and not just one or two have
mm,
a goes.
mm.
Maybe do it for a couple of weeks, give it a whirl.
Yeah.
you know
And we try to make change focus on something. Certainly I do, at least focus on something very, very specific, so it's something you're going to achieve,
yeah,
and that reinforces the neurological experience that it's something I've done. And we know from habits that it's like chopping through a woodland. you know the old pathway will still grow, will still be there, and the new one will be grown over, so you have to keep working at it.
yeah,
And I do a lot of dog walking, and I'm always amazed at how quickly pathways open up if you on the same, even with this little run through for rabbits or something, and you can see where they've gone, but it only
yeah,
takes 3 or 4 goes before that pathway starts becoming a clear route. But you do the same with changing behavior. If you keep walking it, using it, doing it, those neurons and the combination and the sequence of neurons firing become embedded. and eventually they become automated, which is what a habit is.
Yeah, it's great to see the NMRI scanning, I think it is, that
Yeah.
Joe Dispenza uses to talk
Mm,
about how those neural pathways are, so you're uncoupling and then you're
mm,
creating new
mm,
connections
mm,
in the neural pathways.
mm,
It's
mm,
very impressive. I mean, it's
mm,
great to see and listen to a lot of this new
mm,
data that's been coming through over the
mm,
years.
mm.
So is there anything much
Yeah.
else that you'd like to say about the flexibility scale, Joe?
We could probably talk all day about it because it does, like all scales, they connect to all the others and
Yes.
different examples. I would just say um, flexibility is there's two aspects. One is adapting yourself and your own behavior. The other is what you said, it's also about changing for other people. So will you fit in? Will you cooperate? Are you agile, yeah, in the way you do things? And
Yeah.
that's, if you can develop your regard for others, I think it'll help develop your flexibility, because I can see your point of view. I understand where you're coming from. I can see the benefits in what you're saying. Maybe I need to fit in more to what you're saying.
Yeah.
But if I
Yeah.
don't listen to you, I don't have regard for you, then I'm going to be less willing to change my ways.
Going back to that word that you used earlier, which is rigid. It's sort of like
Yeah,
you're rigid with your view. You don't pull at anyone else's
yeah,
views in. You don't
mm,
ask for advice.
mm,
So these are all aspects of the flexibility scale where you are, you score low and you are
mm,
rigid and
yeah,
fixed. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So there's
Okay.
two sides. One is adapting to others, and one other facet I think is really important is optimism, or what we call balanced outlook. If I've got a very pessimistic view of the future and think, oh, it's not going to work, there's no point, there's nothing I can do to change this, that type of
A
stuff.
bit like Eeyore. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for noticing me.
Oh, just yeah, you're not gonna. But if you got some excitement, enthusiasm, like a young person, we say young people are much more flexible, probably because they're more optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can see and they're excited. That's going to give the energy and motivation to be flexible. And you won't even call it flexible. You just call it doing stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we don't need to give this a label. This is just,
No.
and of course, if you're not flexible, everything else is going to change around you, and it's going to be harder to fit in.
Yeah. I mean, it just reminds me as you say that, and fitting in, it just reminds me of the classic little change story that we tell when we're working with a team is, if you're a green bug, like if you're a grasshopper in a field and you're sort of sat on a green leaf, you're happy because you're
Mm,
secure, and
mm,
all things are pretty tranquil in your environment. And
mm,
then all of a sudden, if you hop from that green leaf into a sort of like a yellow field,
mm.
all of a sudden your predators can see, they can see you. So it's about that change aspect. So there's I just find that really interesting around the whole thing of being conscious of how you're
Yeah,
playing.
I mean, that's a whole new field, and the environment we're in
Yeah.
can make us, and we talked about organizations having to change, and you have a group think because we've always done it this way, and there's great things having the identity wrong, but if you're not really in touch with what's going on out there, the marketplace, the paradigm, people, I mean, particularly today, gosh, things are moving on very, very quickly. I mean, certainly I'm in my 50s, and you think, it's very easy to lose touch a little bit, but the first point is recognizing you might be losing touch
Yeah.
if you're not doing all, involved all the time,
Yeah.
because things, human beings move particularly fast at certain periods. And it seems we're going through that period at the moment in many ways. And I think I talked about at one point about, the cows in the field will always be eating grass and probably doing the same thing for the next 100,000 years if they're left to do that.
Mm.
Human beings will never be doing the same thing. We will be advancing. It's our nature is to become bored, restless, and to create new things. That's what the human brain can do
Yeah.
that animal brains don't. And so if you're not using that innate potential and resource, then you're going to be frustrated and fed up. So change does happen, and we have the capacity to work with it if we use, which is what emotional intelligence is learning to
Yeah.
be adaptive.
Yeah. And the grasshopper story is really, it's all about awareness.
Mm,
Awareness of that, the fact that it has changed, and you do need to then flex, because if you aren't flexible in that situation, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought we might go straight to authenticity only because of time, and also connecting with others, Jim, is relationship, and we can pick that up in the relationship scale.
Let's do that. Let's do that. So jump from there, because you already have mentioned the authenticity scale. So okay, so what's help listeners understand what this is about.
Talking about a provocative label, authenticity is one that really triggers people, doesn't it?
So I mean, leaders definitely want to score high on this, and a lot of the time they don't always score well on their authenticity scale, and it's sort of like, that's the one that they go, oh, I was hoping that I thought I was authentic. So
and it's, it might be that you do get the the dark triad, Machiavellian, narcissist, and they're not authentic. They are manipulative and untrustworthy, dishonest, and that's very rarely the case that we're looking at. We're looking at, more often than not, people who are quite the opposite. In fact, they're people with high regard for others, and they're so keen to keep everyone happy around them that they promise more than they can deliver. So, the whole yes person approach means that, authenticity is about being principled, reliable, dependable, and doing what you say you're going to do, and knowable, consistent. But supposing I just, keep on promising and then not keeping my promises because I overpromise, or maybe I'm high on flexibility and I'm low on goal directness, so I just, start something and never finish it. As a boss, I might say, well, you're not very reliable, or I can't depend on you. It's not you're a nasty person. In fact, you're a very nice person. But authenticity is one of the scales that might be affected by that.
Yeah, and I like the reference to consistent as well, and knowable. Yeah, I really like this scale. It's one of my favorite scales as well. Well, they're all significant, of course, but I find this one really interesting in terms of, do they not only talk the talk, but do they walk the walk? I suppose that's really the sort of thing that really sort of is the catch-all for this. And one of the examples I tend to give, Joe, sorry to interrupt.
Cool.
One of the examples I tend to give is the old classic of, okay, so you're saying to your team as a leader that it's really important to have a work-life balance. And yet you exhibit behavior that is completely not that at all. So you're sending emails out over the weekend and, etc. And so your team's experience is that you're a workaholic and you're working nonstop. And so as much as you might say it's important to have a work-life balance, to me, that what I'm seeing from you is that actually work hard, that's how you get ahead, sort of thing. So it's sort of like it's counterproductive.
Do you do what you say you're going to do?
Yes.
Do you not do what you say you're not going to do? And do you lead by example? They're all good illustrations, I think. I remember I used to do a lot with the RAF. They really bought into the emotional intelligence stuff. And one thing I was always very, very impressed by them as individuals, particularly on this scale. And one of their mottos, I believe, is, would you do, how would you act when other people aren't looking? So when other people are looking, we want to impress, we want other people to like us, and we want to do the right thing. But would you do the same thing if other people didn't know? And that's one of the principles, is even when people don't know, it's altruistic, you'd still do the right thing. And I think that's such a telling thing of a integrity, and the kind of values you really want in very, very much in relationships and leadership in particular. Because I do think this scale's particularly important for leadership. One of the reasons is, as the brain is really, the primary purpose of our human brain is to keep us alive and safe. And it's scanning the environment, constantly looking for potential threats. And one of the biggest threats is unpredictability. If I can't read other people, I don't know them, they're inconsistent. So if I've got a leader who is, say, nice to me one day, horrible to me the next, chop and changing up and down, it puts people on edge. And some leaders unconsciously use that as a strategy to keep people on their toes. But actually, it's very unsettling, and it creates a lot of anxiety, a climate of fear.
I can see, as you unpack it like that, I can see how that would create anxiety within a team or an individual.
And often you'll find people would rather work for somebody who is pretty tough, firm, but is consistent. You know where they come from. They'll do the same thing, same rules, and at least the human brain feels predictable and safe. They may not like it all the time, but you kind of know where you are. Maybe in a sort of military context, some people like okay with that sort of authoritative approach. I'm not saying you have to be authoritative, but consistency is very important for a sense of for creating a climate where people feel reassured and safe.
Yeah.
And it's not just, it's the whole organization. If they're chopping and changing and don't do what they say they're going to do, and unpredictably make people redundant or recruit people or do things that feel unfair, is a real bad climate and culture for getting the best out of people's performance and creating loyalty and motivate, all the things that really matter.
I mean, and that is such a good point, Joe. The unfair, Pete. Fair is such a big thing. It's like really hits me as you say it, like and misunderstood, so those things, fairness and being misunderstood, there's a big ones. So yeah, authenticity. So give me some examples of, you must have seen it in someone you've worked with or someone that's had a really good, they walk the talk. So examples that you've perhaps seen or people that you might have worked with that have got really good authenticity.
Well, I mentioned the RAF example.
Yeah.
I think there's, I think about, if one of the things I ask people to do is think about one person in their life who's had a positive influence on them.
Right. Okay.
So for me, influence is leadership.
Yes.
One person in your life is a positive influence. Now, it doesn't have to be a leader. It could be a family person, a parent. It could be a school teacher. But in your life, they've really had a positive influence on you. And then write down what it was about them. And more often than not, it'll be things like, they believed in me. I knew where they come. Those are the leadership qualities. They're the authenticity, confidence in me that really matter. So I think rather than me giving an example of somebody who's got this, think about somebody in your life who's got that, because it'll be different for all of us. And there will be people, and I bet you they will have this aspect to them.
Yeah, I think it's, if someone says they're going to do something, I think that for me is that links to the authenticity. If I say I'm going to give you a call or I'm going to send you something, and then I don't, then that will dent me for sure. So and I'll feel let down. So I can imagine someone on the receiving end of someone that's not that authentic at all.
Yeah.
And it's funny because actually another example I tend to give is, it's a bit like, is today a good day to go in and have that conversation? So if you were talking earlier, Joe, about this scale being, consistent and known. And if a leader is not got great authenticity and you're not quite sure how they're going to act and respond in certain situations, then you're going to be on eggshells.
Yes, that's a good phrase for it, being on eggshells.
Yeah, it's not a great environment, is it? For
that's another example. Think of a climate where you felt at ease and being at your best. What was the leadership like? And one where you felt the opposite. And you'll be pulling out leaders with high authenticity, I think, or what we mean by it. And one way to develop this is very much because you can get people who do have that, but they're kind of closed books. So you kind of don't know how to read this person. Yeah. So it's really important at the same time to make yourself known, to share yourself a bit more than you might normally do as a leader. Talk about feelings and not be too much of a hidden book. And connecting with others is a really important facet to that.
Yes.
Building close connections, sharing yourself, talking about feelings, sharing vulnerabilities as well, really helps build that bond of trust. And and the human brain again thinks, oh, I can connect with you. I know you. I feel safe with you. And for influence leadership, if you want to follow somebody, you need to feel that way towards them.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you said that about, it just made me think about the authenticity and how that links with self-regard, because if you've got a good self-regard, that will help you along that path.
I absolutely. The one thing I think authenticity does for the individual is help them go through difficult times.
Yes.
So if you're having to make very tough, which you will, and a lot of people may disagree with you or not even like you, and all your insecurities may be affected by this. But if you've got a self-belief of you're doing the right thing because you know what your values are, your principles, if you have that inner sense of okayness, self-regard, because you're doing the right thing, that takes people on that journey through those difficult times. And I think it's very closely related in that sense to a sense of, what I call self-belief and self-okayness, self-regard. So I'd suggest people, if you don't know what your values are, work them out, write them down, because it's going to help steer you through difficult periods. Some people, it could be, ethical or religious or moral, or just principles they've been brought up with throughout the family. You probably, again, we all have them. You may not recognize what they are, but recognize how far you go before you feel your boundaries have been compromised.
Yeah, it might be useful. I will share the backward glance values exercise on this episode for those people that are watching this via video. They can get a screenshot of this particular exercise. It's the backward glance thing. You may well have come across it in the book, in my book, Joe. I share it in the back of my book, the values exercise, which gives you it gives you just an insight of, okay, looking on your deathbed, looking back at your life, what do you want to be remembered for? What are the values that you want to be known for? And people write that down on from 1 to 10. So they order them in terms of where they'd like to be remembered, how they'd like to be remembered. And then you do a sort of the same forensic analysis of, okay, so in the last couple of years, where have you been focusing your time and energy on the same list of things? And of course, when there's a disparity between the two, it creates the awareness of, I've been focusing too much on this, but I want to be remembered for that. So it helps you sort of, it creates the awareness of, okay, I'm sort of adrift a little bit at the moment.
I think that's an excellent idea, because I think so often we don't know what our values are, and that exercise, I think they're very powerful. It is getting quite deep, but that's what this stuff is. It is deep stuff that's your guiding principles in life.
I mean, the other way to do it is just, you can actually say, and I've mates of mine that are in our world as well, we've spoken about values. Basically, you can see what you value most by what's showing up in your life right now. So if it's a high value for you, so for example, I value my health and well-being and my fitness. That's number one for me. If it wasn't number one, then it's likely that I'd be double the size of what I am at the moment. I'd be overweight. I'd be I'd be a couch sort of watching TV and all this. I wouldn't be as active. Definitely.
Just one other thought on authenticity is, we've mentioned transactional analysis as one of the underpinning models that we've used in developing this framework and approach to emotional intelligence. And that talks about, having an integrated self. So if you're into TA, you might read a bit about that, and that the adult, the responsible, aware, choiceful part of you, the adult, as it's called, is organizing the different elements. It's organizing the more parental influences and the childhood impulsive behaviors. And we all have these different pulls in our personality. I think Freud would talk about ego, superego, and id. Well, the conscious, choiceful part is the part that needs to organize that, rather than just letting them run wild and do whatever they want whenever they want, which is where you get low authenticity. Might be good fun, but it's unpredictable. You can choose to be unpredictable. I'm not saying don't be spontaneous, but it's a sort of conscious awareness thing to some degree, where you allow yourself, like, let your hair down, going out tonight, going to have a party. So
now that don't remember.
remember. But an element of aware of organizing yourself through that central stem of the adult part. So that's well worth reading about too for authenticity.
Yeah. Okay. Over the years, if we can get into the data, the return on investment, if your organization is looking to invest, or if you're a leader and looking to invest in your team development, why would they, have we got a compelling enough answer? I mean, I know the answer to this, Joe. I know it's a yes. It's a very simple yes. But so what are the bits that you would like to share with our listeners from the white paper? And what I can do is give a link to the white paper so they can get access to this if they want to go a bit deeper into reading it, etc.
Yeah.
But what are the really good chunky bits that you can get your teeth into as a leader or as an HR director that would convince me to say, okay, yeah, I need to do this?
Yeah, because what we've been discussing up to now is, evangelizing something. We think it's wonderful and
of course.
great, but there's going to be other people who are going to take a far sterner approach and say, well, what's the data? How confident can we be? And this is often called the validity. Does it do what it says you're claiming? These wonderful things. I love the theory, but what's the evidence? And this is the expensive bit, because it takes years and years to do one study. And you may need to get lots of data. That's why it's taken 30 years to collect this data, because it's longitudinal, and also what we call, when you collate 30 or 40 studies, they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying, actually, this does relate to people who are higher in this aspect tend to perform better in these ways. That's pretty powerful stuff.
It is.
None of these studies are perfect, but in the early days, Dan Goleman was alluding to this, and the claims are a bit grandiose, but people bought into it and said, that sounds believable. But it's taken literally 30 years since then to get that evidence put together, and there's been a lot of moderation of that, but we know where it works as well. And so that's what this white paper is, a collation of those 30 years of meta-analytic studies, and they tend to group into three main themes where EI tends to have a lot of added value. One is around job performance, which we'll go into, particularly for leaders, which is where most interest has been. Although I would dispute that's where we should be putting most effort. I personally believe it's the lower end of that you can get the biggest impact and biggest difference, because if people are already performing pretty highly, 1% increment is not as big a deal as somebody who's just starting out. So performance is a big area. Engagement, where how committed are people? How loyal? How much effort are people putting in? So what's the emotional engagement? It's about motivation and drive and energy. Is there evidence that people, if you create a climate where people feel empowered, say, emotionally intelligent leaders create a climate where people feel engaged, will they perform better? Again, the evidence is overwhelming there.
And actually, just as you say that stuff around engagement, it's just interesting because, of course, the Gallup stuff, it's taken years and years and years for I mean, that's the biggest study done on engagement. 1.3 billion people around the world look at the data. I mean, over the last 15 years, it's gone from something like 13%, and it's now sat at 21%. People fully engaged. That's crazy. It's just it's sort of like, well, we're still not there. We're a long way short of fully engaged people.
It's fairly steady, isn't it? About 75% of people are disengaged, not engaged, or actively disengaged, which is even worse. They're the people who will sabotage and cause problems. They're better off. The company's better off, productivity wise at least, without those people, because they'll do a lot to lower the climate and disrupt things.
Well, actually, that's where they spend a lot of their time and energy, as Joe, performance managing those people, attempting to anyway. And where I think big bang for buck is that middle cohort, getting them up to the same level as the fully engaged people. But of course, they are distracted by the disengaged people, and that's where they spend all their money and effort and energy.
I think there's always some sort of economic law about that, isn't it? That 80% of the resources are invested in 20% of the people. And if you could just get that down to 15% of people, you'd be saving yourself billions.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So that's a second area of research in this document.
So
which is
performance,
quite
performance and
engagement. And then the third one, which has become bigger and bigger over the last 10, 20 years, is well-being.
Yeah. Okay. Of course.
And I was just looking at the data on that. And I'd written a note. This is the presentation I was giving, a few years ago, and it said 99 billion every year. The cost of the economy of low mental health and well-being is 99 billion. I thought, oh, that must be global. That must be the whole world. And I just checked it out. You can do it now. And the Mental Health Forum data says, no, that is the UK every single year. And it's now gone up to 118 billion. 118 billion is lost in the UK economy due to mental health well-being issues.
And this is now, people off.
It's a very broad term, I know, but it's just it blew me away actually when I saw that. I thought that was, and then I checked in the US, it's 1,000 billion. I mean, these figures are just. We're talking about the economy is largely affected by the well-being of our workers. I mean, that's doesn't get bigger than that.
Well, that's and it's of course there's thinkers at the moment, thought leaders are sort of saying there's a bomb going to be coming, it's going to go off shortly about the whole COVID backlash of mental well-being and people not being able to socialize and all the rest of it. So, but that doesn't surprise me at all. I remember the stats being ridiculously high, and you're talking about people that are taking time off work, sick and stressed and burnt out.
It's a very broad spectrum.
Yeah, but it's a lot of people in there.
It's massive. I mean, 22% of workers 22% of employers are saying the primary cause of long-term absence is low mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
So that's a quarter of them are saying the primary cause of the problems they're facing is due to absence and low well-being. So it's a massive issue. Whichever angle you look at. And I'm not saying, emotional intelligence is a panacea and get that and we'll sort it all out. But if you think about a normal distribution, if you could just take 0.0001% and shift that to the more positive side, so, 1 million people actually are in the more healthy box than the distressed box, you'd be saving several billion just over straight away. So the economic if it works, at least economic impact is unquestionable. And this is the evidence in these papers, these meta-analytic studies, is showing that increasing emotional intelligence training will improve resilience, reduce stress, increase mood, and then engagement. You've got more. These are the stats and data. It's saying improves engagement, commitment, satisfaction, and productivity. So there's a huge relevance here.
Yeah.
And just to show how it fits with our framework, so I've talked about performance, engagement, well-being as the three threads. So performance relates very much to the behavior level of our framework. So you change behavior, people manage themselves better, more goal-directed, better personal power, better on trust and balanced outlook. That correlates strongly with the top left, job performance.
Yeah.
And this is that's with the EIP at least, and there's data we've shared in there. The middle level about engagement, motivation, well-being is very much around awareness. Awareness of what do I want, what motivates me. So that's the middle layer of our framework. And of course, well-being is about self-esteem, self-regard. Am I okay? Do I value other people? If you can start tapping into that multi-trillion pound area of deficit through improving well-being through the bottom layer, then all the arrows filter upwards anyway, so it leads to better performance engagement. Then you've got something really, really valuable, and that's why the framework fits so neatly, I think, with the data we're pulling out.
I like how you've just done that. We've not spoken about it in this way, Jo, before. So I really like how it links to the model. Yeah, very, very powerful. And is there anything? Are there any Because I know you've used certain papers, when you've been working with leaders and creating the awareness for them. Are there any papers that that stand out for you that you think, oh yeah, so and so did a really good, that was one of the papers that really was a sort of like a good piece of research that was done?
There are.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know you've done
don't
that. It's
rename
sort of
all the,
like a
remember all the
no,
names. I mean, Joseph and Newman are examples of who've done a lot of. Meow done some of the more recent papers,
yeah,
and what I really like about some of these papers is what's called incremental validity.
mm-hmm.
Does it add value? Is this a new fad? Is it doing anything different from what was done before, say with traditional personality questionnaires?
Yeah, okay,
Um, and what you need to do then is put the different tools together and say, okay, if we add EI, does this add value over and above, say, a personality trait tool,
yeah,
or an IQ instrument?
yeah,
And that's when the answer is yes, they are clearly adding incremental validity. And you only need a small percentage to make a dramatic impact and improvement.
yeah,
And I would say most of these studies are done on senior leadership level, so
yeah,
they're
of
people who are
course,
hard to improve anyway.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's all in there.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
the
mm,
research from Zenger and Folkman was pretty spectacular. That
yeah,
how to
yeah,
extraordinary. They were looking at it. How do you get extraordinary leadership? And
mm,
they showed that you've got to have the motivation, you've got to have the technical quotient, but actually the game changer is the emotional quotient.
yeah, yeah.
And so
So there's different levels of academic level of study. You've got the sort of peer-reviewed papers, which are the ones we talk about with meta-analytics, and then you've got the big commercial organisations like Zenger and Folkman, McKinsey,
yeah,
HBR, which do some pretty interesting, I'll call it more survey research.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And they're basically talking to the chief executives around the world, who really are the influencers about the economy, largely about how much wealth,
yeah,
which is obviously taxed and invested back in hospitals and education and all the other things that need to be spent on. So it's important that these things grow for the wider society. And they're very much saying EI is on the top 10 list. It's invariably in the top 5
yeah.
of factors that are seen as really important for the future going towards 2030. And yeah, I'd say some of that is in this white paper as well. But of
Yeah.
course, these surveys are going on all the time and things are shifting. They're often called different things, but it may not be always termed emotional intelligence. Um, like, think about agile working needs a lot of flexibility, one of the scales
Yes.
we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
Remote working requires a lot of connecting with others. We need to learn to connect differently. Artificial intelligence, these are things that keep senior people up at night worrying
Mm,
what's going to happen in the future. And the irony is AI, it needs more human understanding, not
yes.
less. Yeah,
Yes.
it's actually, that's where you need more emotional intelligence. That's what they all say. AI and EI, you get the perfect blend. If you just have AI on its own, which is the new revolution, then we're in trouble.
Yeah, no, we're still going to need people to monitor that and input stuff in there.
and just check it's got the human element there, and it's not
Exactly.
just an Android spreadsheet. Otherwise, people will be left behind, which is the whole point of it in the first place. So all of this stuff, and obviously the whole paradigm towards mental health, well-being, resilience, which has been going on for a while, goes to the core of our model,
Yeah.
which is self-esteem, self-regard. So all these things that are going on in society and changes fit very well with the different concepts around emotional intelligence, I believe.
Oh no, I mean, well, I'm I'm completely bought into the
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
thing, but
yeah.
I think that it's great that the data's there, and I continue to use certain references when I'm working with leaders and their teams to just create the awareness of the different data points that are out
Mm,
there.
mm,
So some of the companies that have done, look research on their top performers, and their top performers are the in sales or productivity, etc. They tend to be the people that have got a high emotional intelligence. So, and there's
yeah.
some good data out there that just backs up There was it was always hard in the early days to try and sell the concept of the idea of soft skills, because they always used to say, well, I'm focused on the hard skills, which is get the results, go out and make more calls, sell more, but actually there's the ability to be able to interact and engage and, influence. They're all things that you have to be good at, but that comes through being emotionally intelligent.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just on the individual level, it comes through as leaders. I mean, I haven't talked too much about climate, but I often think of EI as a sort of pyramid. You've got what's going on for me as an individual, but then you've got what's going on for us as in relationships and teams, and at the top of it you've got what's EI of the organization.
Yes.
What's it feel like to be part of this group? And our research into that shows very clearly that positive climate is improved by leaders who have a better awareness of others, connect better with others, have higher regard for others. So all these little facets work upwards to the whole climate of an organization.
And I suppose it sort of bounces back to the comment that I made earlier about Brené Brown's comment, which is, be the example of what great looks like, so be an example of what great leadership looks like, and then other people will get it. They will follow. So yeah,
I should just say, that the white paper is distributed through Tallagy, my previous employer. I think we wrote it originally while I was at JCA, but it's still I think it's been around for a while now, but I think it's still very relevant. And there's always new research, but I think it's all along the same theme since that time.
And I can share for our listeners the link. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, you could go into their website, and the link will be there. I think it's readily available, and they're keen to get it read.
If people need the data to convince their boss that this is something worth investing in, then for sure. Okay.
There's also a load in the book. You mentioned at the beginning one of our, the EI book that I wrote. That's got 20 different specific studies which show return on investment.
And I'll put
different organizations.
I'll put a reminder of that for our listeners as well, Joe, because I think it's very easy. It could be missed on one of the other episodes, but yes, I think it would be great. So if they really want to go into this in a more thorough way, then the book would be a good read for sure.
I mean, that's probably enough for now for people.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's been a great episode, Joe. So thanks again for bringing along your thinking cap. And I know it's very easy for you to dig into this because this is what you live and breathe, as I do as well. But I'm looking forward to getting into in our next episode, start unpacking the relationship management scales, because of course that's the other side. So we've looked at very deeply the self-management side. Next time we get together, we'll start unpacking the relationship management scales, which is the critical piece. So if you've got good self-management skills, can you then transfer it? And it's not always the case, actually. It's really interesting when I'm unpacking this with leaders. It's very interesting that they might have some really good self-control and some good coping mechanisms and strategies for managing their state. But how good are you at doing that with other people?
Yeah. And ultimately, if you're a leader, then you're going to get more return if you're getting best out of others, even if you're not always getting the best out of yourself, ironically.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, have a fantastic week, Joe. It's been great to reconnect and get another episode for our listeners to listen to, and look forward to seeing you in a week or so's time.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jim. Been great. Enjoyed it. Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. Remember to share and subscribe to the EI Guru podcast, and if you have any questions, you can post them once you've subscribed. You can follow me on Instagram at the EI Guru, and you can get more information from my website, theeiguru.com. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.